Hi everyone, my name is Ruth and I'll be walking us through our weaving project today. Now, weaving has a long history. It's one of the oldest surviving crafts in the world. It dates all the way back to Neolithic times. So it has a long history. Even before people were weaving together textiles, clothes and blankets, they were weaving together things like leaves and grasses and branches to make things like shelters and fences and baskets. So it's a tradition that has a long history. And while the mechanism may have changed over the years, the looms may have come and gone, that same basic practice of the up and down, over, under that the weaving involves hasn't changed in all that time. So we'll be starting our weaving today. I'll follow through beginning to end that whole process, but know that weaving takes time. I don't want us to be rushed through this process. And so feel free to pause and rewatch as often as you need. Now, I have some examples right here of some different types of weavings that we may do today. These are all affirmation weavings. So you can see they're made with some fabric strips, some yarn, some pieces of paper that I've written on. I even have some dyed silk that we did from another project. These are just a couple examples of how your weaving might turn out today. I'll get these out of the way because our very first step when doing this weaving project is to gather our supplies. So let's talk about what supplies we need. As always, our first supply is going to be that illustrated instruction. And just like all our illustrated instructions, it'll list out the supplies we need at the top and then step by step how to do this process. Now we're going to be doing number 4, the affirmation weaving. And this is here, we'll be using it today. I'll be guiding us through it. But if this is a process you're interested in, you want to keep doing, you now have the recipe so you can continue on. But that's our first step, is to gather our supplies, and we'll start with those illustrated instructions. So pull that out. We'll also need our loom. So in your kit, this will be towards the bottom. It's just a cardboard loom. This is a really great size. It's small enough so it's easy to carry around, easy to work with. I use this size often, make little coasters and things. So it's a really great size to have, but we'll use this one today. So go ahead and pull that loom out. While you're in the kit, we'll need our fibers. And so we'll need a little skein of embroidery floss. You've got 2 in the kit, so pull one out, pick a color and pull it out. You'll also have a skein of yarn. We'll be using some of that today. We won't use all of it, but we'll use some of it. And you'll also see a little bundle of fabric. We'll need that today as well. Like I said, we're going to be using some of these pieces for multiple projects, so we'll only use some of them today. But go ahead and pull out those fibers, that embroidery floss, the yarn, and those fabric strips. While you're in your kit, go ahead and pull out your strips of paper. There should be a couple in that Ziploc bag. We're going to use these to write our affirmations down. So go ahead and pull those strips out. And while you're in there, go ahead and pull out your tapestry needle. We'll use this to help us with our weaving project today. It'll just be a little plastic needle. It may be a different color than the one I have, and that's okay. But go ahead and pull that tapestry needle out. There are a couple things that we need that are not in the kit, and one of them is a pair of scissors. We'll be working with fibers today, so we'll do a little cutting, so the scissors will definitely be helpful. Then you'll also need a writing utensil. As I said, we're going to be doing an affirmation weaving, so we'll need to write down our affirmations on the paper. And so whatever utensil you have, whether it's a pencil, pen, marker, or paintbrush, whatever it is you have, go ahead and pull that out. Now, ever since those first textiles were made, there have been stories that have been woven in to fabric. The people of Peru used weavings for centuries to preserve their cultural community history. Navajo used weavings to pass down family history through generations. And churches over the years have used tapestries to share Bible stories and parables. Weavings hold history. They record history from battlefields to myths. They record moments. They hold meaning. And so I want us to think about that before we start our weaving today. We're going to be working, as I said, on an affirmation weaving. Now, affirmations are very simply words or phrases that we can repeat to ourselves to help kind of refocus our thoughts. And the idea is that over time, those positive affirmations replace those negative thoughts and beliefs. They encourage us to really visualize and believe a statement to make positive changes in our lives. It's about refocusing. It's about changing our mindset, right? So I want us to take a moment today before we start that weaving and think about what it is that we need to hear. What is it that maybe deep down you know is true, but we need to be reminded of? What is it that your soul needs to hear today, that your heart needs to hear? I know it may feel a little silly to write those things down, but caring for ourselves is important. Putting these in a place where we can be reminded and encouraged is important. So in a moment, go ahead and pull out those strips of paper and that writing utensil and write down that affirmation for yourself. I'll share a few examples, but just take a moment to write those down. Some examples might be, I choose joy. I value myself. I am loved. I am strong. I am stronger than I know. My voice and opinion matter. I am allowed to take up space. Breathe. I am grateful. Today, I choose happiness. If one of those connect with you, go ahead and write those down. If there's another affirmation out there that connects with you more, write that one down. I've got a couple that I chose for myself. I will practice gratitude and I choose happiness. Those are the two that I'm weaving in my affirmation weaving today. So go ahead and write those affirmations down. Once you have them written down, set them aside. We're going to come back to them. But we're going to start with our first step, right? And so that first step, if we look at our illustrated instructions, that very first step is to warp the loom with embroidery floss. Now, I know that may look like a typo, warp. What does that mean? Warping the loom very simply means starting that loom, wrapping that first string around the loom. So we use that to start our weaving. Now, the warp, in this example, you can see that warp is a string that goes vertically, right, up and down. And it's because what we're going to be doing is weaving that yarn, that fabric, whatever it is, that paper, we're going to be weaving it back and forth through that embroidery floss, right? So we have to warp that loom first before we can even start the weaving. So let's go ahead and do that. Get your cardboard loom out, get that embroidery floss, open it up. I always get mine tangled. So if you have a trick for not having your embroidery floss tangle up, let me know. So I'm right hand dominant. I'm going to do my wrapping with my right hand. And so what I'm going to do is with my left hand, I'm going to hold that tail of the embroidery floss to the loom. And I'm going to start just wrapping it, right? Taking it and going through each of those divots at the top and bottom of my loom. Now, as you're doing this, you'll notice that it kind of looks like an angle on one side, but if you flip it over, you can see it's straight lines on the back, and that's where we're going to be doing that weaving. So just continue to warp your loom, wrap that embroidery floss around it, go as far as you can. Like I said, it may not go all the way to the end, and that's okay. We're going to go as far as we can with this floss. But just keep wrapping it. Make sure you go in each of those divots. It doesn't have to be super tight. That's what I was talking about with the knot. I think I gave myself the first knot already. But keep wrapping it till you get to the end of your floss, the end of that string. All right. Whoop. So you want to make sure that your tails are on the same side when you get to the end of that embroidery floss. And so what I'm going to do, I have the two ends. Let me come down a little bit so you can see. I have the two tails of my embroidery floss here, and so I'm going to just tie them together. Now, as I said earlier, it doesn't have to be super tight. It just has to be secure. So I'm going to do a couple double knots. Well, maybe. I'm going to do a couple double knots, to kind of secure that in place. And then I'm going to just trim the end so I don't have that tail getting stuck in anything. All right. And so you can see with my loom, I have that knotted on one side, the tails are knotted together. But when I flip it over, I have a nice straight lines for my weaving, right? And you can see mine didn't go all the way, and that's fine. We're just doing a starting weaving today, so it's no big deal. Having that skinnier one is completely okay. So our next step after we warp the loom, if we look at our illustrated instructions, that next step is to weave in that cardboard strip at the bottom of the loom. Now, if we look at some of the supplies in the illustrated instructions, you'll see that there's a cardboard strip that's not included. I know a lot of us don't have cardboard strips just kind of lying around, and that's okay. One of the things that I use is a piece of paper. So I have this scrap paper that I have, and all I'm going to do is start folding it up, right? Just kind of folding it up on itself. It doesn't have to be super big, right? It doesn't have to be super small. It's just kind of folding this up to make my cardboard loom. And so what this does, the importance of this, is that it stops the weaving. As we're doing the weaving, it stops that yarn from going down into the divots, and it keeps it at a straight line. I'll show you with my example here. You can see I have that strip of paper. It's at the bottom, and my yarn is a nice straight line here. This piece doesn't stay in the weaving, but it is just there to help keep that line straight. Once we start tying it off, we'll take this out, but you'll have that nice straight edge, right? And so that's what we'll do. We'll make that strip ourselves out of just a scrap piece of paper. You can use scrap paper like I did. You can use copy paper. You can use notebook paper. Basically anything is fine to use. I just kind of wrap it up and then I'll weave it in. So when it comes to weaving, the main thing to remember, there are two things to remember. One is over, under, over, under. Over, under. That's the basic property, like principle when it comes to weaving, right? Over, under, over, under. There's nothing fancy. And the other thing is it's the law of opposites here. So you do the opposite of what you did before. And so what we're going to do to start off, let me come down so you get a little closer. I'm going to start off weaving my paper through. So I have that bottom there. And I'm going to start off by doing that over, under, over, under. And I'm going to do that so you can see. I'm going over that first string, under the second, over the third, under the fourth. And I'm just going to do that process all the way down. Over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, all the way down. And so once I get through to the end, I'm going to take my paper and just kind of push it down to the end, right? This is going to be my barrier. Like I said, this is going to protect my yarn from getting in those divots and getting crooked. So it's going to keep that straight edge for me. Now our next step is that step 3 in the illustrated instructions. It's weaving in the fabric and the yarn. And so I'll start with some yarn. That's always a good place to start, right? So go ahead and pull out your yarn. I'll say when I do weaving, sometimes it's easier for me to do smaller pieces. When I get longer pieces, sometimes it gets knotted up and tangled. So doing a smaller piece is okay. So with the yarn, I'm going to do about a yard, no more than a yard for myself. But of course, feel free to do more if you want a bigger strip, more or less. So I'm going to take that little bit of yarn and I'm going to thread it through my tapestry needle. Right? So now I've got my yarn threaded through. I'm going to go back to my weaving and I'm going to start that weaving process. Now, remember I said it's over, under, over, under. That's the rule that we're going to kind of follow along as we do our weaving. But we're going to do the opposite of what we did before. So when I added that paper in there, I started by going over that first string and under the second one. So to do my next row with my yarn, I'm going to do the opposite. So here you can see, and get closer, you can see the paper went over. So with my tapestry needle, I'm going to start by going under and then over. I'm doing the opposite of what that row is. And I'm going to do that all the way down, under, over, all the way down to the end of that loom. It may take a while to get used to this, but that's okay, right? It takes time to learn any new skill. So once you get it to the end, go ahead and pull that tapestry needle through. Now you don't want to pull it through all the way. You want to make sure you have a little bit of a tail, right? The more we weave, the more rows we put in there, the tighter that weave is going to be. And so I'll just kind of scooch it down. That's the technical term there. Scooch that yarn down to the bottom where that paper is, and that'll start that weave. So once I do that row, I have my little tail sticking out. I'm going to go back through the opposite direction. Now I'm going to turn my loom this way, but of course, if you're right-handed or left-handed, if it feels better to do it like horizontally, do it that way for sure. Sometimes it's easier for me to have it vertically and just like use my hands to go back and forth this way. So I ended my row with my yarn going over that string. So when I go back through for my next row, I'm going to start with the opposite. I'm going to start by going under. It's the opposite of what I did before, but I'm still going to do that under, over pattern, right? And so that yarn ended by going over. So when I start my next row, I'm going to start by going under and just do that same process, under, over, all the way down. And then once you get to the end, go ahead and pull it through. Now, you don't want to pull it too tight. If we pull it tight, we'll start to get this hourglass shape in our weaving, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think sometimes it's nice to have that straight edge. And so one of the tricks that I do to help keep that straight edge for myself is as I'm pulling it through, I'll take my finger and hold the end. So when I pull it through, it can pull it tight, but it won't pull those strings, right? And then I can just with my fingers scooch that down, right? All right, so we'll do that next row. Now, because I ended with my yarn going over that last string, when I start my next row, I'm going to start by going under. Remember, it's the opposite of what we did the row before. So under, over, under, over, under, over. Do that whole pattern all the way across. It's doing the opposite of what we did before. And just the same, when I go to pull that through, I'll take my finger and hold that yarn down on the end so I can pull it tight and it won't affect the string here. And then I can just scooch it down. And you can see as we do those rows, as we're building those rows, you can see that weaving is starting to build, right? The more rows we put in there, the tighter that's going to be, and the more in place it's going to hold those fibers, right? So I'm going to do that again. Because my fiber, I missed a string. Because my fiber, my yarn ended on top, going on top of the yarn, I'm going to start my next row by going under. And in that same process again, under, over, under, over. It's the opposite of what the row before is. If you skip a line or skip a string, it's okay. It's so easy to pull that out and do it again. Like I said before, weaving is a slow process. It's not something you can do quickly. So it takes time, and it's okay to kind of slow down with it, right? I think because it's such a repetitive process, there's something that's really meditative and relaxing about it. Doing a weaving can be a little meditation almost. So I'm going to do that again. My yarn, you see, it ended up on top of that last string. So when I start, I'm going to go under. And I'm going to do, like I said, the opposite of what I did before. Over, under, over, under, over, under, all the way down. And be encouraged. The more you do this, the more you do this process, the more you do the weaving, the more familiar and confident you'll be with those weavings, right? The better it'll look. This is our first one to do together, so it's kind of a new process for us. But again, the more we do it, the more we practice it, the better at it we'll be. So I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to show us how to do the fabric. But if you're still working on the yarn, definitely continue doing that. I'm going to go ahead and cut the end off. And it's always good to have those tails, right? Those little pieces that stick out. As I shared earlier, the more rows you put in there, the tighter that's going to be, and it's going to hold them in place. So I'm going to start by using a fabric strip. I'm going to use a purple one from my fabric bundle. Now, some people don't need the tapestry needle to do the weaving. I like using the tapestry needle, but I know sometimes it's hard to get that fabric in the little hole. So one of the tricks that I do is I fold that end just up on itself a few times, and then I can stick it through that hole in the needle a little easier, right? So I have my fabric strip on my tapestry needle. And so what I'm going to do is just start that next row with the fabric. And you can see for this one, my yarn ends by going over that last string. And so I'm going to start my fabric by going under. It's still going to be the opposite of what I did the row before. Now, with fabric, you may find that it pulls this embroidery floss quite a bit. And so it takes a little finagling to get that yarn or that fabric through. So you can leave your fabric strip open like this, and that's fine. One of the things that I like doing is twisting it a little bit so it looks more like cording. I like the way that looks. So that's what I'm going to do for mine. But I'm still leaving that tail at the end. Now, when I come back through, do my next row, you can see my fabric is over that last string. So when I do my next row, I'm doing the opposite. So I'm going under first and then over. And I'm going to do that all the way down. Now, like the yarn, when I go to pull my tapestry needle through, I'm going to hold the end of that fabric. So when I pull it, it's pulling it tightly, but it's not doing a whole lot of bending with the string. Because this fabric is thicker, we may need to take a moment and just kind of, you see mine's twisted on the end, and just kind of separate it and spread it back out. And still do that same, pushing it down. I'll go back through with this now. Over here, you see my fabric is on top of that last string. So when I start my next row, I'm going to go under first and then over. And I'll do that all the way down, doing the opposite of the row before. And following that under, over pattern. Again, when I go to pull it through, I'm going to put my finger there on the end so I can pull it tightly. And then I'm just going to kind of straighten out those strings just a little bit and push down that fabric. So you can see I'm starting to build my weaving. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. But if you're still doing the yarn or you're still doing the fabric, keep doing that. I just want to show us how to start adding in that paper. So I'm going to pull out my first affirmation. I will practice gratitude. And I'm going to weave that one in. Now, it's going to be the same exact process that we did with the yarn, the same exact process that we did with the fabric strip. It's that over, under, and the opposite of the row before it. So if I look at the row in front, the last row I did, it starts with the fabric going under. So I'm going to start my paper by going over and then under. It's the opposite of what I did the row before. And so it may take a moment to get it all the way through. This isn't a skill that comes naturally to a lot of people, and that's okay. But go ahead and weave that in, and you can see it's doing the opposite of what I did before. Let's go a little closer, and you can see how it's woven in there, right? And so that's the basic principle of weaving, the over, under, doing the opposite of what you did the row before. And you do that all the way up. Now, I like to leave the tails out. I kind of like how that looks, but I know some people don't. And so one way to fix that is to weave those tails back through, right? And you just kind of stick them through that weaving. And that's a good way to kind of keep the ends neat and tidy if you like. Or you can be like me and just like those frayed edges. There's nothing wrong with that. It all comes down to preference. So continue your weaving on, keep going all the way up. Know that it's not a fast process. It does take time, and it's okay to be in no rush, right? Take your time with it and really enjoy the process of weaving. Before we end the video today, I did want to share a little bit on how to end the weaving. So I'm going to pull my example back out. This is one I did earlier, and you can see, let me pull it up a little bit. You can see I have the yarn, I have fabric strips, I have my affirmations that I've woven in there, and I've done it all the way up, right? So I have my folded paper that's at the bottom to keep my yarn straight, a nice straight line. And then at the top, you see I finished my weaving, I've got my tail, I pushed it all down. So now what we're going to do is talk a little bit about how to tie it off and get it off the loom, right? So what I'm going to do is flip it over actually and go to the back. And remember, on the back is where we have the tails of the embroidery floss that we tied together. So I'm going to take my scissors and just kind of gently and carefully cut that embroidery floss all the way across, right? So I've got the tails on both sides. So once I get it cut, I'm going to very gently flip it back over. So I'm back at the front, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to start tying the ends together. So I'll start, let me come down. I'll start on this end, and I'll take those first two and I'm going to tie them together. So I'm going to pull those two strings and just kind of tie it together. I'm going to do a couple, maybe a double knot or two to make sure it's secured. And then I'm going to go to the next two, right? Pull those next two up and do that same thing. I'm going to tie it off. Just tie those two strings together. And this is going to hold that weaving in place so it doesn't have those edges coming off. And I'm going to do the same thing with the next one. Pull those out and tie them off. I'm going to do that all the way down. You want to make sure you're doing, you know, a double knot or two because we want it secure. But do that all the way down. One of the cool things that you can do with this is kind of tie it off with a hanging apparatus. So I'll show one of my examples. I have some skewers that I use for kebabs. I just kind of cut it off and tied that in. So I use that as a hanger. So I have the two pieces of wood to kind of end off my painting. I've done it before by going outside and finding some twigs that were really nice and interesting and using those. There are so many different ways to tie this off to finish it. Using the piece of wood is good, but you don't have to. I don't always have something tying off my end other than the knots, but it's just an option. Now, you may notice I have 3 on the end. I don't have an even end. And this may happen. Sometimes you may have an even end, sometimes not. And so there's a little trick that you do. You'll take 2, leave that third one, that odd number, and I'm going to tie a knot, right? Do those knots, tie it, do my double knots. And then I'm going to hang on to one of those strings and use that one to tie off my last one. And just kind of tie that end. Again, doing that kind of double knot. And then I have those strings done at the end. And what you can do is just cut those ends off, trim them up, and you have your weaving tied off. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach us at our email, contact@mather.com, or on our Facebook page. We are happy to answer any questions that come up. I hope this process has been enjoyable for you, hopefully relaxing. It's something that does bring relaxation and calmness to me when I sit down to weave. So hopefully it's bringing the same to you. Happy weaving, everyone, and we'll see you soon.